The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. James spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, and grabbed the handle. It didn't budge. He twisted it again, harder this time, but it was no use. The door was locked. "Hey, is anyone there?" he shouted, banging his fists against the heavy wooden door. His voice echoed back at him, hollow and mocking. The room was small, windowless, and eerily silent. The only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. James took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had no idea how he'd ended up here. One moment he was walking home from work, and the next, this. He patted his pockets, hoping for his phone, but they were empty. No tools, no keys, nothing. Just him and the four walls. He started with the obvious. He kicked the door, then threw his shoulder against it, but it didn't even creak. The door was solid, unyielding. He turned his attention to the walls, running his hands over the cold, smooth surface, searching for any cracks or hidden mechanisms. Nothing. The floor was concrete, the ceiling too high to reach. There were no vents, no gaps, no way out. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt strange in the room. James's mind raced. He tried shouting again, but his voice grew hoarse, and no one answered. He began to pace, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He tried to think logically. There had to be a way out. There had to be. He took off his belt and tried to use the buckle to pick the lock, but the mechanism was too complex. He removed his shoelaces and tied them together, hoping to fashion some kind of tool, but it was useless. He even tried to chip away at the door frame with his keys, until he remembered he didn't have any. Desperation set in. Exhausted, James slumped against the wall and slid to the floor. His throat was dry, his stomach growling. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, to rest. That's when it happened. He dreamed. In his dream, James was back in his apartment. The sun streamed through the windows, birds chirped outside, and the smell of coffee filled the air. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. His girlfriend, Anna, walked in, smiling, and kissed him on the cheek. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said. "You were out cold last night." James smiled back, relief flooding through him. The locked room, it had just been a nightmare. He was home. He was safe. Days passed in the dream, each one perfectly ordinary. He went to work, met friends for drinks, watched movies with Anna. Life was normal, predictable, comforting. But then one night, as he lay in bed, something felt off. The room was too quiet, the air too still. He turned to Anna, but she was gone. The bed was empty. James sat up, his heart racing. The walls of the bedroom began to close in, the familiar surroundings melting away. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, with a jolt, he woke up. Back in the room, the flickering bulb, the cold walls, the locked door, hadn't been real. None of it. The life he just lived, the love, the laughter, the freedom, it had all been a dream. A cruel, beautiful dream. James screamed. He screamed until his voice broke, until his throat burned. He pounded on the walls, on the door, until his fists were raw and bleeding. But no one came. No one ever came. Days turned into weeks, or maybe it was months. Time lost all meaning. James tried everything he could think of to escape, but the room was a prison designed to break him. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring. The flickering bulb burned out, plunging him into darkness. He curled up in a corner, whispering to himself, laughing at nothing. In the end, James stopped trying. He stopped thinking. The room had won. It always did. And somewhere, in the silence, the door creaked open. But James didn't notice. He was already gone.